Good afternoon. Welcome to the Digital Pit Boss. We back at it. We in the battlegrounds. Today we're gonna listen to some audio of the Satanist, occultist, comedic, the white comedic Ayn Rand. And she has an interview where she describes her phenomenal book, Atlas Shrugged, about the takeover of capitalism by conglomerates. She has some very sharp points. But it all concludes to one thing. She believes not in the kingdom of God or the power within. Her viewpoints are parallel to that of the fake Black Power movement in the conscious community. Sit back. I'm going to get into the audio. And if you like, you want to join me in a game of chess while we listen to the audio, you can go to chess.com, set up your account. I'm on there as Cy Fibonacci. And let's get it.
On aspects of her objectivist philosophy and some cultural trends.
Well, it actually took me about 700,000 words in Atlas Shrugged to describe him, so it's impossible to give a description, but I could tell you only the essential characteristics above everything else. A rational man.
A rational man.
Rational man. A man guided exclusively by reason, an independent man, and a man of great self-esteem. Mm-hmm. I would name these three as distinguishing characteristics, the essential ones of what I regard as an ideal man.
Mm-hmm. So a rational man then would depend upon nothing except his own reason for determining his actions.
Exactly.
No belief in or no belief in anything he couldn't see or touch.
That isn't exactly the definition of reason.
Yes,
certainly no belief as faith. Mm-hmm. No faith in anything. Mm-hmm. But reason is the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by your senses. Mm-hmm. So you don't smell or touch with your reason.
Yes, of course.
That's the material which your reason integrates into concepts. And certainly an ideal man would never permit himself to act on the guidance of emotions or to act without knowing exactly what he's doing. Mm-hmm. If he's guided by reason, this will be the first two consequences. He will always know what he is doing and why, and he will not act blindly, and he would not act because he felt like it. To my ideal man and to me, this is one of the worst, most immoral actions that anyone can permit himself to say, I did it because I felt like it. It's quite all right to feel, but feelings are not tools of cognition. They are not guides to reality, and you keep your feelings to yourself. Feelings are the consequences of thought and action, not the primaries.
Well, if I didn't do it because I felt like it, why did I do it? I did it because
you felt. Now you see how bad language is.
Right.
Because you concluded consciously that this is the right thing to do, right for whichever goal you're undertaking. You decide what you want rationally, and you choose rationally what steps you will take to pursue that goal. So that if you take a given action, you do it because you think it is right.
Does man should he have any concern for other men? You say individual, you say...
concern is a very loose term. What would you mean by it?
Well, certainly most of us are brought up by an ethic that says that we are our brother's keeper.
I would say we most certainly are not, could not be, and should not attempt to be. The only concern men should have for other men is respect for their rights. A man should never expect another man to sacrifice for him, nor should he sacrifice himself for other men. He should respect the independence and the rights of others and never take part in any form of enslavement. political enslavement. But outside of that, he's not responsible for other men and should never permit them to assume the role of responsibility for him. He should not submit to force nor exercise force. He should not ask others to live for his sake, nor should he ever live for the sake of others. He should treat others as traders. But that is, if two men agree on a given deal or they want to cooperate, that's fine. They trade value for value voluntarily, without sacrifice on either part. They both serve their rational self-interest if they deal with each other. If they don't want to deal with each other, it should not be forced to.
Emphasis upon rational and their rational self-interest.
Oh yes, certainly. I place that emphasis on everything.
Yes.
Because that which is proper for you on a rational basis cannot be proper for you on any other basis. And therefore, all your rights rest on your nature as a rational being. If you want to claim any kind of rights, you cannot claim them for your feelings, only for your mind. And the actions I regard as moral are only the ones based on rational goals and rational motives.
The others are immoral in your philosophy?
Totally immoral. You mean those the actions
that are not based upon reason?
Yes.
So the charity, in this sense, based upon emotion, would not be moral.
Charity is a very marginal issue. One of my main tenets is that charity should never be a duty. And when you want to help someone else, it is proper, it's not evil, provided you do it on the basis of his value. Because he's a good person who suffers through no fault of his own, because he's a friend of yours, because he's a victim of injustice. Those are all helping values. But never on if you grant a man charity on the ground of his flaws, his not accidental misfortune, but a misfortune brought about by his own evil, then that kind of help I do regard as evil.
How does the concept of love for one another, fit into this philosophy?
Shall we start with romantic love? Because I don't quite understand love.
Romantic
for
love
one
certainly
another.
is a part of your novels. It's
Romantic love I regard as the most properly selfish emotion there is. You fall in love with a person because you regard him or her as a value, and because they contribute to your personal happiness. Now, you couldn't fall in love with a person by saying, you mean nothing to me. I don't care whether you live or die, but you need me, and therefore I'm in love with you. If someone offered love of that kind, everyone would regard that as a deadly insult. That isn't love. Therefore, romantic love is a selfish emotion. It is the choice of a person as a great value, and what you fall in love with is the same values which you choose embodied in another person. That's romantic love, and that is profoundly, properly selfish. Now, any lesser form of love, such as friendship, affection, is the same thing in effect. You grant a feeling of affection to those whom you have concluded are values. Your response to others is on the basis of values. And if they're no good, then you feel the appropriate emotion of contempt.
Are values absolute? Is it either good or evil? Is there any area in
That
between?
depends what you mean.
On which value?
I would say values are contextual. They depend on the context of a given situation. Now, there are unfortunately too many people who are part good, part bad. Well, that's their problem. But what morality would demand of them is to struggle to the best of their ability to be good and never do evil consciously. If a man does that, I would regard him as completely good. If he never does evil consciously, deliberately. However, if he does just one action which he knows to be wrong, but permits it to himself, then he's evil absolutely. The rest is only a matter of time.
You've written that the concept of God is morally evil. Why?
I didn't say it's morally evil. Oh. Not in those words. I said it's false.
False.
I said it's a fantasy. It doesn't exist. I would say religion can be very dangerous psychoepistemologically in regard to the working of a man's mind, faith, because a man who permits himself to exempt some aspect of reality from reason and to believe in a God, even though he knows he has no reason to believe in a God, there is no evidence of a God's existence, that is the danger. Psychologically, that man is not going to be rational or will have a terrible conflict. It's wrong in that way. However, let me say, I certainly recognize anyone's right to have any religion they want to. Their legal right. Morally or philosophically, that's a different issue.
For many people, religion is a way of explaining the mysteries of life, the unknown things. Do you recognize no mysteries?
I don't believe that lack of knowledge is a license to start inventing fantasies. Man certainly is not omniscient, and I believe he should stay within that which he knows, act on his knowledge, and constantly try to expand his knowledge. It's not necessary to be omniscient. I don't think there are mysteries. It's a wrong term. There are a great many things which man doesn't know. And that's what the progress of science's knowledge is for, to learn more and more, but not to invent explanation for what you do not know.
Ms. Rand, you're an atheist. Were you always an atheist? Did you grow up with religious training at all? Or
no, I had practically no religious training. My parents were formally had a religion, but fortunately didn't impose it on me in any serious way. And I was about 13 when I decided I'm an atheist, and that was it.
Was there anything that brought you to this?
No, just simply thinking on the subject. And my main reason was that it is wrong to believe anything for which there is no evidence. And also the fact that I resent religious morality, which tells man that he's an inferior being.
He's not.
He is not. As far as he knows, he's the highest creation in civilization, or the highest being. And the idea of accepting on faith some ineffable being who is superior to you in every way, even though you cannot aspire to that perfection, that is just a formula for psychological inferiority complex, for self-abasement, and I saw no reason for men to accept it. That's as early as 13.
Yes.
I still think so, but I know it much more clearly now.
What kind of education did you have as a young person? You grew up in what is now Leningrad, but then was St. Petersburg. Did you go to regular schools?
Well, I had a regular equivalent of what here is called a high school. It was a gymnasium in Russia. And graduated from the University of Leningrad.
What were your interests in those early years? Were they in literature, in writing?
I had decided that I would be a writer at the age of 9.
At 9?
At 9. And therefore, that was my one overriding interest. But I didn't major in literature in university. I knew that I would learn nothing in school. So that...
You were determined, you knew that you would learn nothing.
Yes. From what I had gathered about the kind of literary courses that were being given. So I majored in history because I wanted to know the history of mankind as a sort of broad frame of reference for my novels, for my future novels.
Were there books or writers that influenced you in those formative years?
Only one. One philosopher and one writer. As far as writers go, Victor Hugo, whom I discovered at 13, and that was the greatest literary experience I ever had, incomparable and incommunicable. I admired him enormously. The sense of lives that he communicated, the glamour, the grandeur of men, was so high above anything I had encountered in any other books, and certainly in another universe as compared to the reality of Soviet Russia, that I, to this day, owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Victor Hugo. And it's from him, in effect, that I learned the art of the romantic novel in the serious sense of the word, the integration of plot, of action, with the theme and the philosophical meaning of a book. I don't agree with his philosophy, but I admire him as a writer tremendously. The other influence is, of course, Aristotle in philosophy, who is the only philosopher with whom I agree, at least in fundamentals, not in everything, but in that which is originally his, not in the Platonic element in him. And that had a great deal of influence on my subsequent thinking, but those are the only two.
Did you begin writing at the age of 9?
I began slightly earlier, at about 8.5. I remember the first story I wrote was signed. It was my name and 8.5 after it. But
was it fiction?
Fiction. It was a movie scenario. I was very impressed with screen, and I started writing screen stories. I attempted my first novel at the age of 16 in my first year in college and gave it up because it was just, I was growing too fast. It became dated by the time I was in my second year. So that I didn't start writing professionally until I was in this country.
When you began writing fiction, did you write within the framework of what you call romantic realism, the grandeur of man, what man could be?
Always.
Were you influenced at all by the Russian Revolution in this respect and living in a Soviet society?
Not at all. Perhaps it might have helped me in the ideas I held long before, in realizing how evil the opposite of individualism
Collectivism.
Is. Yes. In grasping how bad collectivism is in concrete practice. That might have been a value, but it's a horrible kind of experience. And I would rather have arrived at the positive without encountering that negative, but I can proudly say it didn't affect me, it didn't change anything in my way of thinking, the kind of development I can now look back upon. I went to a Soviet university, which of course, apart from, there were still at that time some good professors who were actually teaching subjects, but there was also a great deal of propaganda, and it did not affect me in the least. For that, I'm very grateful to myself.
You came to America when you were about 20 or 21 years old.
That's right.
And then you went to Hollywood. Was this because of your interest in screenwriting?
Yes, but not ultimately. I could barely speak English. I certainly couldn't write. And it was, at that time, the day of the silent movies. So I had figured out that I could be able to write a scenario, but not yet dialogue. That's why I decided I would start with the screen. But my first ambition always was novels.
You did earn your living in the early years in Hollywood in a variety of ways, I suppose.
Oh, I had a bad struggle, yes. I had to hold odd jobs, and I even wait on tables. And first day I tried it, I was fired right there. But the last job of that kind, I was there a whole week, so that I was learning. But it was the years of the Depression, you know, and it was very difficult. I held all kinds of jobs which were very, very boring, but I was able to write.
Was that good for one's character, to have to suffer that way, to work as hard as you worked?
No, I don't think so. I think the only good is later. It gives you a certain self-confidence if you can overcome it and rise above it. But as such, I don't think hardships are good for anyone.
Our research indicated that you worked without pay for an architect, out of which you first began to write The Fountainhead, which of course knows an architect. Is that the reason that you worked for the architect?
As research for The Fountainhead. Oh, yes. And I had asked him for the job for that reason. And he knew it was for a novel, but no one else in the office knew it.
This was not the first novel. This was the third novel by that time, was it not?
Yes. My first novel was With a Living. An Anthem was a novelette. And The Fountainhead.
Did you have difficulty getting your novels published? I've read that you had some difficulty with publishers who didn't accept them readily.
The Fountainhead, I had bad difficulties with, yes. 12 publishers rejected it on the grounds that it was too intellectual and non-commercial and wouldn't sell. And of course, it's one of the great examples of a book made strictly by word of mouth. It was the readers that made this book, and it's still going on as strong as ever.
As strong as ever?
Yes.
How many years after publication?
It's now, it was published in 1943, so it's over 25 years. Can you calculate?
30 years.
Almost 30.
Yes,
That's right.
30 years. Oh, do you understand why?
31.
Yes, that's right. Do you understand why this is so with readers?
Oh, yes. Because I was presenting them with a philosophy which is desperately needed today and which doesn't exist anywhere else, because it was absolute desert in literature, both literarily, both in regard to romantic realism. There were no such novels. Practically everything that was serious was naturalism in those years, and more importantly, it's the philosophy of individualism.
Why do you object to, or why do you not like novels which are close to life as it really is, naturalism?
Because I don't think it's art.
It's not art.
It's partly art. In other words, a naturalistic novel is an incomplete work of art. It has certain elements of art, such as characterization, or some of them have a good style. All that is artistic. But art primarily, and that I can prove philosophically, is a recreation of reality, not a photograph. Art is not journalism. It is a recreation of reality according to an author's metaphysical value judgments. Metaphysical.
Does that mean that
meaning.
you write only about what ought to be, not what is?
Yes, but let me finish. I use the big word, so I want to be sure that the audience does understand me. By metaphysical, I mean the nature of reality as such, the nature of existence. It's his view of man and of the nature of existence that a writer or any artist really expresses in art. And romantic art presents to man what he might be and ought to be. That is, it presents an ideal and tells man this is the essential nature of man, and you as a human being can become that if you wish. So that art, in that sense, romantic art is model building. Not, however, and I emphasize that, not for the purpose of improving or teaching your something to your readers.
Not teaching.
Oh, not teaching. Art should never be didactic. That's a secondary issue. That's pure gravy. The primary purpose of art is contemplation for its own sake. It is for the reader to see what greatness man is capable of and to be inspired by that.
So as I read Atlas Shrugged, then, and any one of the heroic characters, Hank Reardon or John Galt or Francisco, these give me a model of the kind of person I might be?
If you wish, but that isn't my purpose in writing.
I see.
My purpose is for you to look at those people and to enjoy the spectacle. As a secondary consequence, you might find yourself inspired. That's fine. But I want to give you that experience. And that's what I want to give myself. I write for the purpose of creating an ideal man in actions which you can respect and admire, and which you don't find too often in life.
And you said, yes, that ideal man would be productive. And that to be productive is most favorable environment is a laissez-faire capitalism without restraint upon him.
Of course.
So that you would oppose antitrust laws, income tax, all the restraints that are normally imposed.
Oh, yes, certainly. Not normally. They are imposed abnormally.
Abnormally, I see.
But yes, I would oppose all that. I believe in complete, laissez-faire, full, unregulated capitalism. Not mixed economy. What you have today is certainly not capitalism. But you have to leave man free to function.
From what you say about art, I would judge you do not regard photography as art, since it records precisely what is there. How do you feel about abstract art?
Do you mean non-objective?
Non-objective.
I think it's less art than photography. I think it is an enormous fraud.
Fraud?
Yes. I don't think there's... it's impossible to discuss it seriously. It means nothing. It is nothing. The perpetrators claim that they don't know what they're doing. And I think they're right. I'm willing to take them at their word. They don't know what they're doing, and neither do we. And the ash can is the proper place for it. But I mean it seriously.
Yes, I know you mean it seriously. I suspect many of those who've read your novels will wonder if you plan to write any more novels.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm under contract to write one, but I can't promise you when I will have it done.
How many years did it take you to write Atlas Shrugged, which is an enormous volume?
13 years. But my next novel won't be that long.
It won't.
Oh, no. Atlas is just once in a lifetime.
I should think so. I want to return for just one moment to religion and to the ethic in which so many of us were raised. Of course, religion is used by some people as a way of facing the idea of the inevitability of death. How do you feel about that as an objectivist? That is, how do you feel about death? Is it?
It doesn't concern me in the least because I won't be here to know it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you see that death, the worst thing about death, and what I regard as the worst human tragedy, is to lose someone you love. That is terribly hard. But your own death, if you're finished, you're finished. My purpose is not to worry about death, but to live life here on earth and now.
Do you find joy in that life?
Oh, yes. Very much so.
What are the sources of joy? Achievement?
Achievement. And romantic love, my husband.
Mm.
Those are the two great values in life. Career and romantic love.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. You know what we do. I guess surf and tangent, then dip with the chips. See ya. Okay, that was Ayn Rand giving a perspective on her book. You should really go check out the movie Atlas Shrugged. I mean, she's definitely prolific. I spoke about her much more before. But at the same time, she's part of that makeup that developed the Kemetic community today, long before the black face Satanists got to coming on YouTube. That video comes out of about, let me go back and check. That was an interview. She was kind of young in that one. Let me see if they tell us exactly what year. 1973. Ayn Rand. Going hard in the paint. Movie already topping the charts. Books topping the charts. She got a lineup. Her cohorts, Alice Bailey. Y'all know about Alice Bailey in the 10-point plan. Others, oh man. Let's get a few of these occultists on record. I got more, and Ayn Rand is the way it's pronounced. I don't know why I like saying Ayn Rand, but it's Ayn Rand, A-Y-N Rand, R-A-N-D. She hate that Bible, but she ain't got no history to match. Now, she was a promoter of the Peel and Planned Parenthood, as well as Alice Bailey, and they was all backing up Margaret Sanger, right? So when you put these concepts together, you start to understand what level of people you're dealing with, right? You start to reveal a remarkable conspiracy. They wanted to build interfaith movements. They need other perspectives to attack that Bible because they just couldn't do it alone. You understand? We're going to do a little Margaret Sanger to contrast what we just heard. Let's get into it a little bit. Let me cue it up. Y'all know how we do it. Oh, yeah.
Today's Philip Morris is no ordinary blend. It's a special blend of domestic.
This is a rerun for the this is kind of a rerun for my true calculated risk takers that's been following that long, at least about 10 months. People tell me, hey, man, you need to bring back this, bring back that. I'll be like, come on, now I can't go in reverse. They be like, but there's new people following and they don't know what's really going down. There's a lot of videos on my page. I can't even remember everyone that I do. I just know I've done it and covered it and it's there. And, when you're kind of sitting there listening to some garbage coming out of the conscious community, you might want to come over here and run through my profile and find a topic, a title. But let's get into some Margaret Sanger. This is the sexual partner and business partner of the atheist, civil rights leader, NAACP supporter and founder, W.E.B. Du Bois. The boy. Let's get it.
My taste may be different from yours, but on this I think we could agree. This cigarette tastes for a cigarette to come.
Get past the Phil Morris commercial.
All of that. Let me ask you this first of all. Why did you do it? I realize that you had an intellectual conviction that birth control was a boon to mankind, but I'm sure that others have that conviction too. And so what I'd like to know is this. What events, what emotions in your life made Margaret Sanger a crusader for birth control?
Well, Mr. Wallace, it's hard to say that any one thing has made one do this or that. I think from the very beginning, I came from a large family. My mother died young, 11 children. That made an impression on me as a child. I was a trained nurse, went among the people. I saw women who asked to have some means whereby they wouldn't have to have another pregnancy too early after the last child, last abortion, which many of them had. So there's a number of things that are one after the other that really made you feel that you had to do something.
There are some other possible reasons that suggest themselves on reading your biography by Lawrence later. Your mother, as you say, died prematurely after bearing 11 children. She was born a Catholic, was she not?
She was born a Catholic, yes.
And your father was a sort of a village atheist who clashed with church authorities, and because of his atheism, his earnings dwindled under community pressure. You and your brothers and sisters were known as, quote, children of the devil, end quote. Could it be then that, in part at least, you were driven emotionally toward the birth control movement because of antagonism toward the church, because that was a way to fight the church?
No, I don't think I had anything of the kind in mind. I was what I would call a born humanitarian. I don't like to see people suffer. I don't like to see cruelty, even to this day. And in nursing, you see a great deal of cruelty and unnecessary suffering. At that time, there was no opposition as far as the church was concerned, any church. It was mainly the law, the federal law and state laws that one had to think of. The church was not in my mind at all.
Well, in going after your motive then, and I will press you just a little bit more about that and then get to the specifics of this evening. But in your motive, in the movement, is it possible that the movement itself, the feeling of wanting to do anything that you felt was important, that perhaps that moved you a good deal? Because the fact remains that you led a movement against overwhelming pressures that stemmed back for centuries, and in doing so, according to your autobiography, you even left your first husband. And you wrote this to a friend, Mrs. Sanger. You said, "Where is the man to give me what the movement gives in joy and interest and freedom?" Now, what was this joy, this freedom that you craved?
Well, I don't remember that letter, who it was written, but I think that it was not a question of marriage at all. There was a certain satisfaction in doing something that was going to alleviate the sufferings of women in particular, and I was quite a feminist at the time.
Obviously.
And yes, and I naturally didn't want to see women take all the suffering of childbearing and of pregnancies. So it was a pleasure, in a sense, to think that you were striking at an archaic law, which it was, put on the statute books by Anthony Comstock some years ago, and no one had stood up against it. No one had tried to change the laws. And at that time, not even a doctor had a right to use the United States mails and common carriers for books, for learning, for anything that he had to do with this question. It was considered obscene. The whole question was considered obscene.
Mrs. Sanger, you have helped to spread the birth control movement not only here in the United States, but in Europe and the Orient as well. Why? Why is birth control of such a vital importance internationally? Is it just to save women's suffering? Is that the only reason in your mind?
Well, not entirely. The population question is a great concern today, and the rate at which the births come in to we're saving them now. At one time, when children died, they didn't have the food. Today, our population all over the world is getting certainly better consideration and better conditions than they had at the time that I was there. I went to every country because I was invited. And I didn't go into the country myself. I was invited to go to Japan and to speak there, to have 8 lectures on the question of birth control and peace.
Well, do you believe that birth control is essential if we want to keep millions of people across the world from starving? Is that your thesis?
Say it again.
Do you feel that birth control is essential to keep millions of people across the world from starving?
Well, I think the birth control, where to keep your population more or less static until you pick up your resources, certainly you'll prevent their starving.
But what's more important, birth control or picking up the resources?
Well, picking up the resources, there's just a limit to that, too. There's just so much. Take Japan. And she cannot feed. They've had the best experts come there. When MacArthur was there, the best experts have said they have 20 million more people than they can feed. She's got to be fed outside in some way. She's got to have that kind of help if she's going to keep from fighting.
But certainly around the world there is potential agricultural land that is not being properly used now. Just this past year, on May 21st, the New York Times summarized an important study of the world's food resources made by Professor James Bonner of the California Institute of Technology. Professor Bonner says the world is not using 1 billion acres of potential agricultural land, and he adds that if this land were used and present agricultural land were improved, the entire world could be fed adequately, even if the population increased by 1/3 in the next 50 years.
Oh, Mr. Wells, you hear so many fantastic things of what can happen, what may happen. This and that, I've heard it for the last 30 years anyway, of what could be done, but it's never done. And the thing is, what is it now? What have we got today? A very distinguished woman spoke to me about Arizona. And she said, I wish you wouldn't talk about population. She said, all the population of the United States can be put in one state. And I said, what state? She said, Arizona. I said, did you ever hear of caliche? She didn't know that I was talking about a delicatessen or what. I said, well, caliche is harder than any rock. And it is about 3 inches below the ground, where it looks beautiful. It looks as if you could have food. It looks as if you could have corn or wheat or cotton. But as a matter of fact, you have to dynamite caliche out of the ground in order to have a little shrub, have a little grass or a few flowers. So there's many problems when it comes to that. And the demographers, I never heard of anyone that would agree with that, if we could have another in the world. Another third.
Well, you say that originally the opposition was in all law, and you have to fight against that. Today, your opposition stems mainly from where? From what source?
Well, I think that the opposition is mainly from the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church.
Of the Church. Well, now of the hierarchy of the Church. You feel that the parishioners themselves, the lay people in the Church, are not against birth control.
I feel they come to all of our clinics just the same as the non-Catholics do. Exactly the same.
Well, let's look at the official Catholic position opposition to birth control, I read now from a church publication called The Question Box. In forbidding birth control, it says the following. It says, the immediate purpose and primary end of marriage is the begetting of children. When the marital relation is so used as to render the fulfillment of its purposes impossible, that is by birth control, it is used unethically and unnaturally. Now, what's wrong with that position?
Well, it's very wrong. It's not normal. It's not, it has a wrong attitude toward marriage, toward love, toward the relationships between men and women.
Well, the natural law, they say, is that, first of all, the primary function of sex in marriage is to beget children. Do you disagree with that?
I disagree with that 100%.
Your feeling is what, then?
My feeling is that love and the attraction between men and women, in many cases, the very finest relationship, has nothing to do with bearing a child. It's secondary. Many times we know that. You see your birth rate, you talk to people who have very happy marriages and they're not having babies every year. Yes, I think that's a celibate attitude.
Sure, a celibate attitude, but you agree that Catholicism, according to the tenets of Catholicism, they rule that birth control violates not only the church's position, it isn't the church's position, but they say that it violates a natural law, as I have just explained. Therefore, birth control is a sin, no matter who practices it. Now, the violation of the natural law, according you certainly can take no issue with the natural law as the hierarchy of the Catholic Church regards it.
Well, I certainly do take issue with it. I think it's untrue, and I think it's unnatural.
Well, let me ask you...
bears it out, but it's an unnatural attitude to take. And how do they know? I mean, after all, they're celibates. They don't know love. They don't know marriage. They know nothing about bringing up children or any of the marriage problems of life. And yet they speak to people as if they were God.
Let me ask you this question. Suppose a healthy, well-to-do couple decide for some reason never to have children, use birth control all their lives. Would you say that your methods are being misused, Mrs. Sanger?
Now, if they were intelligent people and they had some reason for thinking of children as a responsibility, or some disease that they might have that they wouldn't like to pass on to a child, and I think it would be a very unselfish attitude for them to take if there is a disease.
No, I say a healthy, well-to-do couple. A couple that just doesn't want children, and for that reason they use birth control all the way.
Well,
do you think that that is a misuse of your methods?
I don't think it's a misuse. I think it's, if they're intelligent adults, but they must know what they want. They must manage their lives themselves. And certainly there's nothing in birth control. Then there isn't other things that you might deny yourself.
I asked you your motives a little while ago at the beginning of the program, your motives in working for birth control as hard as you have for as many years as you have. You reject the principal Catholic argument against birth control as being totally invalid. What do you think is the reason, the motive of the Church in forbidding birth control?
You'd have to ask a Catholic that. I couldn't say what their motive is.
Well, you couldn't say officially what their motive is, but you certainly must have an opinion about it, Mrs. Sanger.
Well, I don't have much to do with the hierarchy. And I know that the people that come to our organization and want to have the same methods, or whatever it is that one can have to prevent a pregnancy, that those women will say to us, we ask their religion very often, and they say, I am a Catholic, I was raised in the Catholic Church, my church is wrong on this. This is the one thing. I will never be anything else, but my church is wrong on this one thing. And that is said over and over and over again. So what the motive is?
Well, you won't hazard a guess.
I don't care to. Thank you.
May I ask you why? Now, I know that in private and actually in public discussions, I think, prior to this time, you have been willing to state your understanding of what the motives of the church are, and now you would rather remain silent. May I ask you why?
Well, simply because I don't think that this church has changed in its attitude. Some of the hierarchy have changed their attitude. You can't say the same thing that you might have said a year ago or 2 years ago, as to your belief or as to your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then
have you heard it said that the reason that the church is against birth control is because they want more Catholics?
I've read it.
Do you believe it?
Well, if you read their papers, where they point out Boston, that's what has happened in Boston and Massachusetts. They have simply outbred the Protestants, and they've in Boston and Massachusetts, they have control. I've read that in their own papers.
Of course, the church's answer, and I read now from a pamphlet published by the Redemptorist Fathers in Missouri, says as follows. It says that point of view about wanting more Catholics is nonsense. Quote, the Catholic Church does not command Catholic husbands and wives to have even one child. The Church considers it more than normally meritorious for them to have no children, if they mutually and perpetually give up the use of the marriage rite for the love of God.
All right. I don't quote what they do. So I think that the question in my mind is that they do and order their own people to do as they wish. But I object to their having the same rules for people who are not the same religion.
Well, they believe, you see, that it is a natural law, not a Catholic law, but a natural law. And therefore a sin not just for Catholics, but a sin for all peoples. And I think that there are other religious groups, the very, very Orthodox Jews feel the same way about birth control. Let's look at another argument against birth control, Mrs. Sanger, published in Red Book magazine in March of 1956. It says birth control is a devastating social force which tends to weaken the moral fiber of the community. Immunity from parenthood encourages promiscuity, particularly when unmarried persons can so easily avail themselves of the devices. Do you doubt that?
I doubt it.
You do?
Certainly.
Then let me read from a news story in the Philadelphia Daily News on June 10th, 1942. The story quotes you as urging the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps to give its members, quote, preventive measures against pregnancy, end quote. And you add, quote, abortion and illegitimacy are bound to result if the government doesn't recognize human nature, end quote. In other words, you were not advocating Christian morality, but rather ways for single women to avoid bearing illegitimate children.
Where was this taken from?
Philadelphia Daily News, June 10, 1942, direct quote from Margaret Sanger.
I doubt it. I don't believe I ever made such a remark.
Well, in the same vein, in your autobiography, which you cannot disavow, you wrote the following about sexologist Havelock Ellis. You said he's been able to clarify the question of sex and free it from the smudginess connected with it from the beginning of Christianity. Now, what do you mean by the smudginess connected with sex, and why do you blame it on Christianity?
Well, there's many reasons, of course, to say that we have more records of it beyond Christianity. And I think I was speaking of Havelock Ellis as having clarified the question of homosexuals, making the thing not exactly a perverted thing, but a thing that a person is born with, different kinds of eyes, different kinds of structure, and so forth. That he didn't make all homosexuals perverts. I thought that he helped clarify that to the medical profession and to the scientists of the world, as perhaps one of the first ones to do that. That's one of the things I meant in that.
Mrs. Sanger, do you disagree that Catholics, or do you feel that Catholics should not have a right to have a say when a city administration contemplates spending their tax dollars on birth control or the dissemination of birth control information, something that Catholics believe is sinful?
If they have a right to say what they...
Do you feel that they don't have a right to have a say when a city administration contemplates spending their dollars, tax dollars, on birth control? For instance, here in New York, Catholics comprise about 45% of our population. They're the largest single group. Well, don't you think they should have the democratic right to lobby against having their money spent, their tax money spent for something that they consider evil?
Well, I suppose they have a right, and they certainly do it. But so have the others. They're only 45% of the population. That is not the majority.
But they have a right to get up and...
Certainly. I have no objection to having them say that, but I think we could have the same right. I say we, I mean non-Catholics.
Well, of course, this is a little bit...
Okay, let me stop that real quick because I'd really like to read something, as we done covered this before. While these fake black power dudes teach us, Dr. Issa and his cohorts, Dr. Leonard Jeffries and them, over there on the HOK platform, where Pit Boss laid down that Alice Bailey, and Surfing Tangent think that a goddamn YouTube video went to my motherfucking head when I done walked millionaires over here from the music industry that can give me a way bigger platform, and I ain't even rushing to go get that. But you know, y'all be getting y'all feelings. So let me share my screen real quick. Got a lot of damn screens open, so I'm confused as which one I'm putting stuff on. But nevertheless, let's get it. So here we are with the Negro Project, right? And so some lady named Dorothy Roberts writing a book based upon what was going on in the Negro Project. She says in her seminal book, The Killing of Black Body, let's make that word babies, The Killing of Black Babies, Dorothy Roberts points out that the leader in the Black community actually welcomed Sanger's birth control agent in the 1930s and even criticized it for not going far enough to serve Black people. W.E.B. Du Bois, the Negro Boy, who was one of the first Black leaders to publicly support birth control and who worked closely with Sanger, Margaret Sanger, to advocate for it, even serving on the board of a clinic that Sanger opened up in Harlem, criticized the wider birth control movement because of its failure to address Black people's needs as well. It was this failure that gave birth to the sinister sounding Negro Project. Due to segregation policies in the South, the birth control clinics that opened up in the 1930s for the white women only. Sanger wanted to change that. She sought to open clinics in the South, staffed by Black doctors and nurses, to educate Black women about contraception in 1939, after she had been named honorary chairman of the Board of Birth Control Federation of America, the precursor of Planned Parenthood. Sanger launched the Negro Project, the Federation's division of Negro Services, a national advisory council, which included prominent Black leaders like Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune, E. Franklin Frazier, Walter Wright, Reverend Adam Clayton Powell. See, these is the people that the fake Black power is pushed to the front. But notice nobody on Pit Boss list be on this list. Because I understand who these people are. And how these people came before us sucking in because they were already atheists in their whole flow. How can you be a reverend? Oh, people, I got to take this call. I'm sorry about the show, but I got to go. Y'all not donating. I got to get back to the business, baby.